The Bureau's Forgotten Man by David Hall 2804202, Chapter List, Chapter 1, The Name They Forgot Chapter 2, The First Step Chapter 3, Secrets in the Shadows Chapter 4, The Hunter Becomes the Hunted Chapter 5, The Prey and the Predator Chapter 6, The Final Reckoning Chapter 7, The Reckoning Chapter 8, The Final Escape. Summary: The Bureau's Forgotten Man follows Arliss, a former FBI agent consumed by vengeance after a career marked by betrayal. Once a rising star, he is pushed out of the agency by his mentor, Hawthorne, leading to his personal and professional downfall. As Arliss hunts down those responsible for his ruin, he faces the Bureau's relentless pursuit and uncovers the dark secrets that have bound him to a corrupt system. Driven by anger and a thirst for justice, Arliss's quest for revenge spirals into a deadly cat-and-mouse game, culminating in a final confrontation where survival and redemption are no longer certain. In the end, Arliss must confront the ultimate price of vengeance, knowing that the Bureau will never let him go. Chapter 1, The Name They Forgot. The rain beat against the window in rhythmic bursts, like a drum, a constant reminder of the world outside. But Michael Arliss didn't hear it anymore. He hadn't really listened to anything in years, not since they'd quietly discarded him. He leaned against the cracked windowsill of room 412 at the Hotel Hamilton. The faded neon sign from across the street spilled sickly green and red light into the room. A tired buzz. Everything felt half done here. Everything felt like it was halfway through being forgotten. He flicked the ash from his cigarette into the glass tray, watched it burn down to the filter. Just like him, years ago, he had been the name everyone in the Bureau knew. Arliss, a golden boy, agent with distinction, fearless, relentless. He had chased down gangsters, run dangerous operations, and cleaned up messes without hesitation. The press had loved him, the country had loved him, but none of it mattered now. He had been erased. The Bureau had done it quietly, a clean break. They'd handed him his papers with a smile, congratulated him on his service, and told him to enjoy his retirement. They'd said it like a prayer, like it was something sacred, but it wasn't. It was a death sentence. Not to him, of course, not yet. The room was silent except for the low hum of the radio in the corner, perpetually tuned to a station with nothing but static. He hadn't turned it off, didn't want to. The noise kept his mind from wandering too far into places it shouldn't go. Arliss turned his attention back to the manila folder on the desk. The paper was old, worn at the edges, but it still had the names on it, the names of the men who had turned their backs on him, who had betrayed him and, by extension, the very ideals they'd once preached. He hadn't meant to fall this far, but here he was. He was tired of pretending it was something else. The names on the list were more than just reminders of the past. They were symbols of everything that had been taken from him. The first name was familiar. K.D. Hawthorne, Assistant Director of Internal Affairs, the man who had once been his mentor, the one who'd brought him into the fold of the Bureau, shown him the ropes. Arliss remembered the late nights in the office, the whispered conversations, the way Hawthorne had reassured him during some of the darkest moments of his career. He had looked up to him, he had trusted him, but that had been a long time ago. Now, Hawthorne was just another bureaucrat in a pinstripe suit, another cog in the machine. Arliss had learned the truth over time. The FBI wasn't about justice, it was about power, about control, and when they didn't need you anymore, they didn't hesitate to cast you aside. The folder was worn, stained with years of handling, but the names were still clear. 6 more men, all complicit in the decision to push him out, all still breathing. His fingers hovered over the names, the anger stirring within him again. But it wasn't just anger, it was more than that. It was a quiet, controlled rage, one that had been building for years, gnawing at him in the dead of night, in the spaces between breaths. He picked up the gun from the desk, the Colt .45, its weight comforting in his hand. He had always been meticulous about his weapon, just as he had been meticulous about his work. But this time, he was not cleaning it for duty, he was cleaning it for something else. The door creaked open behind him, but he didn't turn. He knew who it was. They always showed up when they were needed, or maybe when they weren't. Leaving again? The voice asked. It was a woman's voice, soft but firm. A reminder of who he used to be, who he used to care about. "I'm not going anywhere," Arliss said, his voice rough, almost hoarse. "You can't keep doing this," she said. He could hear her footsteps move closer, feel her presence behind him, but the feeling in the room wasn't one of comfort. It was a reminder of how far he had fallen. The woman was a part of his past, a link to a life that didn't exist anymore. Her name was Sarah, and she had been a part of his life before the bureau had consumed him whole. But Sarah was gone now, as much a memory as the man he used to be. "I can't stop now," Arliss said, his voice flat. "They made me this. They've taken everything from me." "You made yourself," Sarah said softly. "You chose to become this." But Arliss didn't hear her. He wasn't listening anymore. He was too far gone. The first name on the list still burned in his mind, Hawthorne, and after that, there would be the others. They wouldn't get away, not this time. "You'll be back," she said, a statement more than a question. Arliss didn't answer. He didn't need to. The door clicked shut behind her as she left him alone in the silence. He stood there for a moment longer, staring at the gun. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out into the darkened night. The hunt was about to begin. Chapter 2, The First Step. The streets were quieter than usual, blanketed in the kind of cold that made everything seem distant, unreal. The rain hadn't stopped since the night before, a constant downpour that made the city feel claustrophobic. Even the neon lights that reflected off the wet pavement seemed to flicker in hesitation, as if unsure of their place in the world. Michael Arliss stood across the street from a small, nondescript building, watching the lights inside flicker like old film. The name on the door read Sutherland Consulting, a small-time private firm with no real reputation, but it had one key function: it handled the paperwork for those who wanted to keep their hands clean. The first name on the list had been easy to find: Roger Sutherland, a former colleague who had moved up in the world, his career tied closely to Hawthorne's. He had been one of the first to go along with the Bureau's decision to cut Arliss loose. He had been among the many who had offered the casual apology, the excuse about restructuring, and the half-hearted handshake. Arliss was done with apologies. He had watched Sutherland for a week now, following him through his daily routine, learning his patterns, his habits. Sutherland was no different than the rest, a man who believed his success was earned, not inherited. A man who thought he was untouchable. Arliss was going to make him feel that vulnerability. Inside, the office was quiet. Only a single lamp illuminated the worn leather chair behind the desk, the rest of the room dark except for the faint glow of the street lights outside. Sutherland sat with his back to the door, unaware of the figure standing in the shadows, watching him. His hand hovered near a decanter of whiskey on the desk, and Arliss could see the weariness in his posture. He was drunk. Good. Sutherland's office wasn't large, but it felt cramped, almost suffocating. The air was thick with old wood and the musty smell of forgotten files. Arliss pushed open the door just enough to slip inside, moving like a shadow. Sutherland turned as the door creaked, but before he could say anything, Arliss was on him, the gun pressing to the back of his neck. "Arliss," Sutherland said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fear. "I thought you were dead." "Not quite," Arliss muttered, pressing the barrel harder against his skin. "But you'll be soon." Sutherland froze, his face going pale. "What do you want?" "What I want is for you to pay for what you did to me," Arliss replied, his voice cold, controlled. "What I want is for you to feel the same thing I felt when they pulled the rug out from under me." Arliss moved the gun just enough to make sure Sutherland could see the disgust in his eyes. The betrayal, the cowardice, the years of being nothing more than a pawn, it all flooded back in that moment. He had been thrown away, but now, it was Sutherland's turn. "I'm not going to beg," Sutherland said, a tremor in his voice. "I don't know what they told you, but this isn't the way." Arliss smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "No," he said, "it's exactly the way." The shot was quiet, too quick to even register, too fast for Sutherland to make a sound. One bullet, clean, efficient, final. Arliss stood over the body, feeling nothing. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of rain pounding against the windows. He walked out of the office without looking back, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The first name on the list was crossed off. One down. Chapter 3, Secrets in the Shadows. The rain hadn't stopped, but Arliss had long since stopped caring about the weather. It had become a constant background noise, a dull reminder of the world outside his pursuit, the world that had discarded him. Sutherland was dead, his blood staining the plush carpet in his office, but the satisfaction wasn't there. It never came. The bullet had been clean, quick, and precise, but there was no joy in it, just a hollow emptiness. Arliss moved through the darkened streets, the weight of the gun still heavy in his hand. He couldn't shake the sense of unease that had started to crawl under his skin. Each kill was supposed to bring him closer to closure, but instead, it was dragging him deeper into something darker. The names kept swirling in his mind, each one a taunting reminder of what had been taken from him. As he turned the corner, his gaze landed on a small diner tucked between two buildings. Its fluorescent sign buzzed weakly, the word open flashing like an invitation. He wasn't hungry, he wasn't tired, but the diner offered a quiet refuge, a place to think. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and fried food, a warm contrast to the cold that pressed against the windows. The counter was empty, save for one man sitting in a booth, reading a newspaper. Arliss didn't pay him any attention. He sat at the counter, ordered black coffee, and waited. He had crossed off the first name. Now, it was time for the next. The second name on the list was one he hadn't expected to find. It was a name that had come up in passing, a forgotten name that Arliss had ignored at first. Jacob Walters. He had been a low-ranking agent who had worked with Arliss early in his career. Walters had always been the type to follow orders without question, the kind of agent who didn't ask where the money came from or why certain cases were being handled a certain way. Arliss had never trusted him. Now, Arliss had a reason to. Walters had been the one to plant the seeds of doubt when Arliss had started asking questions about the Bureau's internal operations. He was the one who had seen the shift in the Bureau's priorities long before Arliss did. He was the one who had whispered in the right ears, the one who had turned the tide against Arliss. Walters had been a small player, but he was part of the system that had betrayed Arliss, and now, he was going to pay. He sipped his coffee, eyes scanning the room, the quiet hum of the diner a perfect cover. Walters wasn't far away. Arliss had followed the trail for days now, piecing together his movements, watching him interact with certain figures. Walters had been careful, covering his tracks, but Arliss knew the Bureau's methods better than anyone, and he knew where to find a man like Walters. After finishing the coffee, Arliss stood, leaving a crumpled bill on the counter. He walked out into the rain, the cold air biting at his face as he turned down another alleyway. He had no more time to waste. Later that night, Arliss found himself standing outside a small, run-down building on the edge of the city. A warehouse. Walters had been meeting with someone here, and Arliss had tracked the meetings to this location. The street lights flickered as Arliss moved silently through the shadows, blending into the darkness. His breath came in steady, controlled bursts. His mind was sharp, focused. He could almost feel the tension of the coming moment, the anticipation building in his chest. He rounded the corner and found the door slightly ajar, the faintest sliver of light spilling out. It was too easy. He had been here long enough to know that when things felt too easy, it meant someone was watching. But Arliss didn't care. He was already too far in. The door creaked as he pushed it open, his gun held tight in his hand. Inside, the warehouse smelled like rust and oil, the dim lighting barely illuminating the rows of empty crates. There, in the back corner, he saw the figure of Jacob Walters, standing in conversation with a man Arliss didn't recognize. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit that didn't belong in a place like this. "Walters," Arliss called out, his voice low but sharp. Walters spun around, his eyes wide with shock. He dropped the briefcase he had been holding, his face paling as he recognized Arliss standing in the doorway. "Arliss," Walters stammered, his hand reaching for his sidearm but stopping halfway. He knew it was too late. The man in the suit reached for his gun, but Arliss was faster. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty warehouse, the bullet finding its mark. The man in the suit crumpled to the ground without a sound. Arliss moved forward, his eyes never leaving Walters. You're the one who helped put the pieces together, aren't you? You're the one who made sure I didn't survive." Walters swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the door as if considering an escape. But Arliss knew he wouldn't make it. He wasn't going anywhere. "I didn't do anything to you, Michael," Walters pleaded, his voice shaking. "You've got it all wrong." Arliss's gaze darkened. "Wrong, number? I've got it all right." He took another step forward, the gun still aimed at Walters. "You're just another piece of the puzzle." With a final, measured shot, Walters fell, his body hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. Arliss stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle over him. The second name was done. Another step closer. Chapter 4, The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The rain had stopped by the time Michael Arliss left the warehouse, but the cold still clung to the city like a damp shroud. He wiped his hands on his coat, the weight of his actions pressing down on him, though not enough to slow him. 2 names down, 2 targets executed, each one a small victory, but it was never enough. The satisfaction didn't last. It never did. Arliss had been following the pattern long enough to know that the Bureau wasn't going to let him run unchecked forever. They couldn't. As soon as they realized what was happening, they would come after him with everything they had. He had always been good at his job, but he knew better than anyone what the Bureau was capable of. The same precision and ruthlessness he had used to track down his targets would now be turned against him. He needed to move fast. His next target was William Hawthorne, the man at the top, the architect of the betrayal. Arliss had always known that Hawthorne was the mastermind behind the whole operation, the one who had pulled the strings from behind the scenes. It was Hawthorne who had orchestrated Arliss's fall from grace, who had quietly pushed him aside and let the wolves tear him apart. But Hawthorne was untouchable. He was too high up, too protected, or so Arliss had once believed. But now, after 2 killings, the world had changed. Arliss had already crossed a line, and he wasn't going back. He didn't know where Hawthorne was hiding, but he knew one thing for certain: someone in the Bureau knew something. Someone would have answers, and Arliss wasn't afraid to get those answers, no matter the cost. He found himself in front of a run-down motel on the outskirts of town, his eyes scanning the dark windows, his mind racing with possibilities. This was where the trail had led him, a dead end for most people, but not for Arliss. He'd learned to read the signs, the subtle changes in behavior, the small mistakes that people in the Bureau always made. A man had been trailing him for days now. Arliss had noticed the pattern: the same black sedan, the same pair of sunglasses. A Bureau agent, no doubt, but who, and why? Tonight, the man was waiting in the motel parking lot. Arliss could feel it. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm waiting to break. His eyes narrowed as he approached the building, every step careful and deliberate. As he reached the entrance, he spotted the sedan parked in the far corner. It was the same car, the same agent, and Arliss was done running. Inside the motel, the hallways were dark, the air thick with stale cigarette smoke. Arliss moved quickly, following the silent footfalls of his stalker. He could feel the weight of the gun at his side, the familiar cold steel that had become his only companion in the past few days. The man was close now, too close. There, at the end of the hallway, the agent appeared from behind a door. His silhouette was cast in the dim light, tall and angular. He didn't see Arliss until it was too late. Arliss moved fast, closing the gap in seconds. Before the agent could react, Arliss had him pinned against the wall, the gun at his throat. "Who are you working for?" Arliss growled, his breath hot against the agent's ear. The man's eyes widened in fear. "I'm just following orders." "I don't know what you liar," Arliss spat. "You know something. Who sent you?" The agent's face twisted in panic. "I don't know. They just told me to follow you, to make sure you didn't." "Didn't what?" Arliss's grip tightened, his patience thinning. "Make sure I didn't do what? Tell me, now." The agent swallowed hard, sweat trickling down his forehead. They said you were getting too close, that if you started making moves, we were supposed to stop you, but I didn't know it was. I didn't know you were." "Stop me?" Arliss's voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. "Who gave the order?" I can't tell you." The agent's voice cracked. "I don't know who you are anymore. You were one of us." Arliss pushed the gun harder against the man's throat. I was, but you know what? You're just another part of the problem. He pulled the trigger before the agent could speak again. The sound was deafening in the narrow hallway, echoing like a warning shot. The agent slumped to the ground, lifeless. Arliss stood over him for a moment, watching the blood pool beneath him. The questions were still unanswered, but he had the information he needed. The Bureau was closing in. They were tracking him. They had been for days, maybe longer. He was running out of time. As Arliss moved toward the exit, a strange sense of unease began to settle in his chest. The storm was coming, but this time, it wasn't the rain. The Bureau was no longer just watching, they were hunting him. Chapter 5, The Prey and the Predator. The motel had been a temporary stop, a brief reprieve from the chaos, but now Michael Arliss was on the move again. The weight of the dead agent's blood was still fresh in his mind, a reminder of how far he had gone. It didn't bother him, it didn't make him hesitate, but it made him aware of the fact that the Bureau wasn't playing by the same rules anymore. The game had changed. He needed to get to Hawthorne, but there was one last obstacle before he could. The man who had followed him all this time wasn't just an agent. He wasn't just someone doing his job. No, Arliss knew better than that. There was something more to this chase, and he was about to find out exactly what it was. He drove through the city's dark streets, the headlights cutting through the mist. The rain had started up again, but this time, it felt like it was pushing him forward. Arliss didn't need to stop. He didn't need to think. His mind was laser-focused on one thing: Hawthorne. Hawthorne had always been elusive, but now he was the only thing that mattered. But before Arliss could get close to him, there was someone else waiting. As Arliss parked the car in front of a dilapidated building, a place he knew well from his past, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He wasn't alone. Someone was here, waiting for him. He stepped out of the car, his hand instinctively brushing against the gun at his side. His eyes scanned the area, searching the shadows for movement. Nothing, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. The building was empty, save for the echoes of his footsteps. Arliss had learned a long time ago that silence could be just as dangerous as a gunshot. He moved quickly, stepping into the corridor, the sound of his boots striking the cracked concrete the only noise that filled the space. Then, just as he turned the corner, the flash of movement caught his eye. A figure stepped into the dim light, blocking the exit. Tall, imposing, and wearing the same suit as the man he'd killed earlier. The face was unfamiliar, but the body language was unmistakable. This was no ordinary Bureau agent. "You've been a problem for a long time, Arliss," the man said, his voice cold and calm, "but you've been more useful than you realize." Arliss's hand gripped the gun tighter. He wasn't about to be cornered. "Who are you?" The man smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "That's not important. What matters is that you've made it this far, but you're not going to make it much farther." "Then why don't you try me?" Arliss said, his voice low, eyes never leaving the man. The man's smile widened. "I don't need to fight you, Arliss, I'm not here for that." He stepped forward, his every movement deliberate, slow, like a predator toying with its prey. "I'm here to tell you that the game is over. You're no longer the hunter, you're the hunted." Arliss felt a coldness wash over him. This man wasn't just any agent. He was different, calculated, precise, with a dangerous calm that made Arliss's pulse quicken. Whoever he was far more than just an obstacle. He was the key to everything. "What do you want?" Arliss growled. The man's eyes narrowed. "I'm not going to stop you from taking down Hawthorne, but the truth is, you've already lost. You're too far gone. It's already over." Arliss didn't wait to hear more. In one fluid motion, he pulled his gun, the barrel aimed directly at the man's chest. But before he could pull the trigger, a sound, a sharp click, came from behind him. He froze. Another figure stepped out from the shadows, gun raised. "Drop it, Arliss," the second man said, his voice just as cold, just as calculated as the first. The first man didn't flinch. "You're making a mistake," he said, looking directly at Arliss. "But it's not too late. There's still time. You can still be a part of something bigger. The Bureau is where you belong." The words hit Arliss like a slap to the face. He wasn't sure whether they were meant to mock him or warn him, But they did something else. They dug deeper into him, unsettling the certainty that had been his shield for so long. Could they be right? Had he really lost his place in the world? No, Arliss muttered to himself, shaking his head. I'm done with them, all of them. The second man stepped closer, a smirk on his face. So, you'll keep fighting, keep killing, but you're just a ghost. Arliss, they'll find you, and when they do, you'll be nothing. Arliss raised his gun, this time at the second man. Not tonight. The sound of another click rang out, followed by the cold press of a gun barrel at the back of his head. Drop it, the man behind him ordered, the words a sharp, final command. Arliss stood frozen for a long moment, his breath coming in slow, deliberate breaths. The walls felt like they were closing in on him. He was surrounded, trapped. But something deep inside him refused to surrender, to give in. He could hear the rain pounding against the roof, louder now, as if urging him to act. The weight of the gun in his hand felt heavier, but it also felt right. With a swift motion, Arliss dropped to the ground, rolling out of the way as the bullets flew, crashing into the walls and shattering glass. He spun to his feet in a fluid motion, his gun already raised. The first man went down without a sound. The second man, too, dropped to the floor, his life snuffed out in an instant. Arliss stood over them, his chest heaving. He'd done it again, survived. But now, more than ever, he could feel the walls closing in. He was running out of time. Hawthorne would have to wait. Chapter 6, The Final Reckoning. The silence after the shooting was deafening. The two men lay sprawled on the cold, cracked concrete, their lifeless eyes staring at nothing. And yet, Arliss couldn't shake the feeling that he had just entered the point of no return. Blood pooled beneath their bodies, the crimson stain spreading out like a warning. He could feel the weight of every move, every breath, as if the entire city had frozen around him. He had done it, he had killed them, just like he had killed the others, but each death felt heavier than the last. The first had been easy, an act of survival, the second had been justifiable. Now it felt like the walls were closing in on him faster than ever before. There was no more running, no more hiding. The Bureau would know soon. It wouldn't be long before they were sending everything they had to track him down. They had already sent trained operatives, but now that he had killed two of their own, there would be no mercy. He needed to finish this. He needed to make sure that Hawthorne paid for what he had done. That was the only thing keeping him moving. But the rain hadn't stopped, and the feeling in the pit of his stomach had only grown darker. As he turned to leave the building, the creaking of an old floorboard echoed behind him. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun that still hung at his side. His heart raced, but there was nothing. The hall was empty. Arliss moved quickly, stepping over the bodies as he made his way to the exit. He could hear the distant hum of sirens, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the whole city was crawling with agents. He had no more time to waste. Hawthorne was out there, but where? The answer came to him as suddenly as a crack of thunder. He had known the answer all along, deep in his gut. Hawthorne wasn't hiding, he wasn't running, he had been in plain sight this entire time. The Bureau's biggest secret was that Hawthorne had never really left. The operation had been bigger than anyone had suspected, even Arliss. It wasn't just about him, it wasn't just about power, it was about control, and the man who had once been his mentor, his friend, was at the heart of it. Arliss drove through the city streets with purpose, the engine of his car roaring like a beast beneath him. He had to get to Hawthorne, but it wasn't going to be easy. Hawthorne would be ready for him, but Arliss had learned to adapt. He had to. If there was one thing he knew better than anyone, it was how to outlast an enemy. He parked the car a few blocks away from an old office building. The place was familiar, one of the many bureaucratic shells Hawthorne had used over the years to operate. It was in a nondescript part of the city, just far enough from the action to go unnoticed but close enough to make a quick escape if necessary. Arliss knew this place better than he cared to admit. As he walked to the building, the weight of the gun in his hand felt reassuring. He would confront Hawthorne here, in this place of memories and lies. He would make the man who had betrayed him pay. The door was locked, but that wasn't a problem. Arliss had always been good at making his way inside. With a swift, silent motion, He forced it open and crept inside. The air was cold, stale. It smelled like the ghosts of the past, like the room had been untouched for years. The lights flickered above him, casting long shadows across the walls. The place was empty, too empty. Arliss moved through the building like a shadow, his footsteps barely making a sound. He knew Hawthorne was here. He had to be. The entire operation, the betrayal, everything. Hawthorne had orchestrated it all from this very place. He could feel it in his bones. Then, a door creaked open behind him. Arliss turned, gun raised, and there he was. Hawthorne. For the first time in what felt like years, Arliss felt something stir inside him. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Hawthorne was older than he remembered, his face weathered by time and stress, but there was still a sharpness in his eyes, a calculating glint that had always made Arliss uneasy. "You finally found me," Hawthorne said, his voice a smooth, calculated drawl. "I knew you would, but you're too late, Michael, too late to stop this." Arliss's grip on the gun tightened. "I'm not here to stop anything, I'm here to end it. I'm here to end you." Hawthorne chuckled, the sound hollow and dry. "You think this is the end? You think you can come in here, guns blazing, and take me down? I'm untouchable, Arliss. You should know that better than anyone." Arliss's voice was low, a growl. "You were untouchable, until you made a mistake. You underestimated me, and now I'm going to make you pay for everything." Hawthorne's eyes flickered, just for a second, a glimpse of something Arliss couldn't place. "You're a fool," Hawthorne spat, his voice suddenly venomous. "You think you're the hero of this story? You're nothing but a pawn, just like the rest of them." Arliss took a step forward. "I'm not a pawn, not anymore. You're the one who's been playing everyone, and I'm the one who's finally going to make you pay." The gun was raised, the words were spoken, the air between them crackled with tension, as if the entire building were holding its breath. And then, Arliss fired. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. The shot rang out, deafening in the stillness of the room. Hawthorne's body jerked back, his face contorted in disbelief. Blood bloomed from his chest, the crimson spreading rapidly across his shirt. He fell to the ground with a sickening thud, eyes wide open, staring at Arliss as if seeing the culmination of their twisted dance for the first time. For a long moment, Arliss stood still, his hand still gripping the gun. The sound of his own heartbeat was the only thing he could hear, drowning out the silence that had settled over the room. The finality of the act hit him hard, but there was no triumph, no relief, just emptiness. Hawthorne lay motionless on the floor, his blood seeping into the cracks of the cold concrete. Arliss had done it, he had brought it all to an end, but it felt hollow. The answers he had craved for so long were now within reach, but in the face of Hawthorne's death, they felt insignificant. The Bureau's grip on him, his vendetta, the years of torment, was it worth it? Arliss stepped closer to Hawthorne's body, his boots echoing in the silence. The old man's eyes stared at nothing, the life drained out of him. Arliss had known this moment was coming, he had known that it was inevitable, but somehow, now that it was here, he found himself unable to move forward. The weight of what he had done sank deep into his chest, like a stone lodged in his ribs. He had killed the man who had ruined him, the man who had destroyed everything Arliss has believed in. But as he stood there, looking at the lifeless body of his former mentor, it felt less like a victory and more like the closing of a chapter that had never truly begun. Arliss sank to his knees beside the body, the gun slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor as his fingers trembled. The pain in his chest wasn't from the gunshot or from any physical wound, it was the pain of loss, the pain of realizing that vengeance hadn't given him what he thought it would. In the end, the cost had been too high. His mind flashed back to the days when Hawthorne had been a father figure to him, the long hours they had spent in training, the camaraderie they had shared in the field. But it had all been a lie. Hawthorne had always been one step ahead, always playing a game that Arliss hadn't fully understood. He had been a pawn all along, just like the others. Now, there was nothing left to do but face the consequences. A faint noise behind him broke through the haze of his thoughts. Arliss spun around, his instincts kicking in. He was met by the sight of a man in a dark suit standing in the doorway. The man's face was hidden in shadow, but the silhouette was unmistakable. It was too late to escape. "You did what you had to do, Michael," the man said, his voice smooth and unyielding, "but you've sealed your fate now. The Bureau won't stop until they find you. You'll never outrun them. You know that, right?" Arliss's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" The man stepped forward, the light revealing his face. Arliss's breath caught in his throat. He had seen this man before, years ago, back when he had still been part of the Bureau, a fellow agent, someone he had trusted, a face from the past. "I'm just another reminder of what you've become," the man said, his eyes cold. "You think killing Hawthorne will change anything? It won't. The Bureau will make sure of that. You're a liability now, a liability that can't be controlled." Arliss stood up, his fists clenched. "You're wrong. I'm done with them. I'm done with all of you." The man chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. "You think you can escape the web, Michael? You've been caught in it from the moment you stepped back into the game. The Bureau doesn't let people like you go. They never let you go." Arliss's mind raced. He had known it would come to this, but hearing it out loud made it more real. He wasn't just a fugitive now, he was a target. No, worse than that, he was a symbol of everything the Bureau had built, a living reminder of their control, their power. They wouldn't stop. They couldn't afford to. The man in the doorway took another step forward, his eyes scanning the room. "You've crossed the point of no return, Michael. You're already dead. It's just a matter of time." Arliss didn't flinch. "Then let it come. I'll take whatever comes next. I'm done hiding. I'm done running." The man smirked. "You're not running anymore, Michael. The hunter has become the hunted, and now, it's the Bureau's turn to decide how this ends." Arliss's eyes locked onto the man's, a coldness settling in his chest. He was right. There was no escaping this. No more games, no more vengeance. It was the final act, the last move in a game that had consumed him. "I've already made my peace," Arliss said quietly, his voice steady. "Now, I just need to survive long enough to see it through." The man took another step, his hand moving toward his belt, where a gun was holstered. Arliss knew what was coming, but he wasn't afraid anymore. His life had already been stripped down to its bare essentials: survival, vengeance, and now, the grim reality of a future with no escape. As the man raised his gun, Arliss braced himself. But before the shot could be fired, the sound of distant sirens grew louder, growing closer by the second. There was no time left. Arliss didn't wait to see what happened next. He ran. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know how long he could outrun them, but for the first time in years, he felt the raw freedom of the hunt. He was the last man standing, and he wasn't going down without a fight. Chapter 8. The final escape. The sirens wailed louder now, echoing through the streets of the city, but Arliss barely noticed. His breath came in ragged gasps, his boots pounding the pavement as he sprinted through the alleyways, weaving between abandoned cars and trash-strewn corners. The weight of everything, the years of betrayal, the death of Hawthorne, the violence he'd committed, was finally beginning to catch up with him. But there was no time to stop, no time to feel the weight of his past pressing down on him. He had been running for too long. The moment he killed Hawthorne, he knew the Bureau would come for him. The moment the bullet had entered his mentor's chest, he had sealed his fate. There was no going back now. As he rounded a corner, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. The agent from earlier, still hot on his trail. But this wasn't just one man, this was a whole team now. The Bureau's operatives had been dispatched. They would be relentless. Arliss ducked into a narrow alley, his mind spinning. He couldn't keep running forever. There had to be an end to this. He couldn't outrun the system. No one ever could. But he was determined to die on his own terms, to die free. He glanced over his shoulder, his breath steadying for a moment. A single thought passed through his mind: the only way to survive now was to make them believe he was already gone. In the distance, the sound of vehicles skidding to a halt and the thump of boots on concrete drew closer. Arliss took a sharp left into another alley, deeper into the labyrinth of the city. The wind howled around him, the rain pelting his skin, but he didn't stop. He reached a dead end. The alley was closed off by a high brick wall, no way out. but there was something about this place that made his skin crawl. A strange familiarity he couldn't place. His heart pounded, not from exhaustion, but from the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. He heard the voice before he saw the man. End of the line. Arliss, the agent called, his footsteps steady and deliberate. There's nowhere left to run. Arliss stood still, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the alley. He could hear the sound of a gun being drawn, the unmistakable click of the safety being removed, but he wasn't scared. He was done with fear. You think you've won? Arliss muttered, his voice low, his eyes narrowing. This was never about winning, it was about survival. The agent stepped forward, the gleam of his gun catching the light. His eyes were cold, unfeeling. Survival's over. You've made your choice, and now, the Bureau makes theirs. Arliss's mind raced. He couldn't take this agent out, not with his gun trained on him. He didn't have much time left. He glanced down at his hand, still trembling slightly, but the gun was still there. He still had one chance, one last move. Suddenly, the agent's stance shifted. There was something wrong. Arliss took advantage of the momentary distraction, lunging forward as the agent hesitated. In a split second, he grabbed the agent's arm, twisting it violently and sending the gun flying from his hand. The agent staggered backward, surprised by Arliss's strength. Before the agent could recover, Arliss threw him to the ground, pinning him with his knees. He needed answers, and he wasn't leaving without them. The agent gasped for breath, his face contorted in pain. You're not getting away, Arliss. The Bureau's got you. You can't escape. Arliss tightened his grip on the man's collar, his voice a whisper of rage. I'm not trying to escape. I'm trying to make sure you don't get another chance. He lifted the agent by his throat, slamming him into the brick wall. The agent sputtered, gasping for air, but Arliss didn't let go. The blood pulsed in his temples, and for a moment, he felt the all-consuming fire of his anger burning in his chest. Tell me where they're taking me, Arliss hissed. Tell me where I'm going next. The agent's eyes widened, realization dawning as he understood Arliss's plan. You're not going anywhere, he managed to say. This is it. The Bureau's already marked you. There's no place for you to hide. Arliss's eyes glinted with a strange coldness. He let go of the agent's collar, leaving him to slump down against the wall. For a long moment, the two men just stared at each other. Finally, Arliss spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. Then it's over, for both of us. With that, he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the rain-soaked night. The agent, still gasping for breath, was left behind, helpless. Arliss didn't know what came next. He didn't know if he could outrun the Bureau forever, or if they would eventually catch up with him. But at that moment, he realized something. He had already won, not by killing Hawthorne, not by killing the agents who had come after him, but by taking control of his own fate. In the distance, the sound of sirens began to wail again. They were coming for him, but this time, Arliss didn't run. He didn't need to. The chase was no longer his, it was the Bureau's, and they would never catch him. The end.